ahead. And just like a guy whose feet are too big for his bed.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the Live for Supercross podcast. Today we're breaking down round 14 from East Rutherford, New Jersey. And I gotta say, this podcast is gonna be a little different than the usual episodes. Normally we get into this thing and we look at the track hard, how it was in the morning, and we try to analyze who did good and who will excel when it comes to the night show. But with the curveball the weather threw us in East Rutherford, not only did we have a completely different track in the morning than we did for the start of the heat events, but by the time it got to the main events, and with some divine intervention to make it happen at the perfect time, we've got this postponement that has an entirely mud-covered, soaked, baked. It's a mudder, boys, and it's coming for us, and we got it just in time. It was excellent to watch, and because of that, we're going to spend the whole time breaking that down. It wouldn't really make any sense to waste a lot of time on the heat races. It wouldn't really make a lot of sense to waste time talking about the track in the morning, talking about how there were rocks in it and the soil was horrible and the lip faces were breaking down immediately, because by the time the night show started, none of these things were a factor. So we are going to go ahead and jump right into the main. But before we do that, there were some passes of note, some changes of note in the morning, some crashes, all sorts of shit went down throughout the day. And we have to cover some of that before we get to the main. Injuries. First off, we got to start Aaron Plessinger. This guy's out. He has a huge crash in practice. There's a clip of it we're going to take a look at here. He's coming around to hit the stadium triple. There's a little double beforehand, not really causing problems for anyone. And this is a jump, they've got certain specifications. It's always 75 feet, I believe it is. So they're prepared to hit these things pretty consistently, even though they're enormous. Something happens with this guy. The front end looks like it compresses a little bit, whether he hits a rock or drops into a divot or a rut he wasn't anticipating. But the front end drops and it never really uncompresses, so he never gets any lift off this jump. He doesn't have the speed to compensate for it, even though it seemed like he had a decent run up. And he ends up just casing this thing as badly as you could possibly imagine. He goes somersaulting through the air. There's no way this guy was lining up in the evening. I don't care how tough you are. That was worse than any crash that I've seen in Supercross as of recent. And sadly, Aaron Plessinger isn't the only fan favorite that we're going to end up losing in qualifying, okay? Because Adam Sansarillo comes out in the second qualifying session. He's running near the front of the pack. They're coming around that flat 90 and hitting that double that leads into the double straightaway section that cuts back across the starting straight 180 bull berm straight again. And Justin Barsha just gets caught in a rut, going over this double, gives it too much throttle, ends up turning completely sideways. AC T-bones him on the top of the jump, and he goes down really fucking hard, doesn't line up for the night show at all, and did a little interview, I think with Jason Wygant or someone, where he just was clearly devastated. The guy feels like he can't catch a break. Finally tried to turn up the speed last week in Atlanta, and the whoops made him pay the price for it. And he was suffering with some head injuries, probably had a concussion, possible, and had to sit this thing out. And just another devastating run of luck for Adam Sansarillo. Now, we talked about injuries. When it comes to near injuries, we got to talk about what happened to Eli Tomac. I'm sure you saw it on the broadcast, whether you watched the night show or not. But he goes down in weird circumstances in the first qualifying session. He is coming down off a pretty standard rhythm section, double, and then there's one final single, and he just loses the handlebar. His throttle hand slips off completely, and he ends up taking a tumble and hurting his knee, what seemed to be pretty badly. They didn't need to wheel him out, but he was limping really hard. Looked like he limped down to his bike to get on it in the opening ceremonies. But ultimately, he wouldn't be deterred. A champion of his caliber isn't going to let anything that isn't life-threatening stop him at this point in the series with the points as close as they are. Comes out in the second qualifying session and ran up front for a while, made a point that he was going to be there in the evening. And he was. We'll talk about how he did when he get to the main, of course, but this guy did not let any evidence that he was any the worse for wear show up on the broadcast or to any of his competitors. That's all the 450 stuff. I guess with the 250s, we got to mention, you already know, Nate Thrasher went down hard last week, dislocated his hip, among other things, had hip surgery. We're not going to see him here. He's out of the championship points race, might have been already, and that's going to be the end of the year for him. Hip injuries are gnarly. Definitely not going to see him, I'd imagine, before the outdoor season, and we hope he can get back in time to get some rounds in there. That was just a gnarly fucking crash, man. He got thrown almost as bad as AP did off that triple. Now, when we get into the 250 heats, like I said, we're going to gloss over them real quickly. But I think what needs to be pointed out with the West Heat is Jet Lawrence, bad start, climbs through the pack, even if the conditions are at their best at this point of any time throughout the day, as far as the track is concerned. He ends up finishing half a second off RJ, and the lap he put in here to get it done was a 46.554. And that's worth discussing just on its own merit, because I'm going to throw that up here with the next closest lap time any time of the day, including qualifying. Obviously, the main event wasn't going to put up fast times, but we're talking 250s or 450s. And you look at Kenny's here, Ken Roxon, the number 94. He puts up a 47.318 in the heat, and he was absolutely smoking there. And so for a guy on the smaller bike to come out here and beat that by 3/4 of a second, I think we just have to acknowledge, if the track conditions stayed like they were at that point in the night. I love Max Anthony too. He's hilarious, but he was not going to win that if the conditions hadn't deteriorated to the point that they did. Jet Lawrence was fucking on top of it, and nobody was going to touch him and come out and put out anything below a 47-second night here in East Rutherford, regardless of track conditions. When it comes to the second 250 heat, we got to give a shout out to Joe Shimoda. He put in an excellent ride to get his first win back, only his second back since injury, breaking his collarbone. Atlanta, his first appearance of the season. Been off the bike for a while, comes back and gets a heat. And this is shocking to me, but that's the number 30's first heat race win ever. I don't know. I thought he had a couple in the bag, and maybe that's because he's gotten so much faster as of late, starting with the outdoor season. But we're finally seeing streaks of that here, that the excellence he showed in the Lucas Oil Motocross Championship in 22 is also going to transfer to indoors. And he's got a smooth style. Why not? He can handle the technique and the finesse of the gas and the brake and the suspension as good as anybody. He did end up going 9th place in this main event here. But I mean, come on, right? The guy hasn't raced all year, and then you're going to throw those track conditions at him indoors. I mean, as gnarly as anything I've seen. And you got to consider that the day was a nightmare. These guys started early, and they weren't lining up for the main event till 10, 11 p.m. because they ended up getting pulled off the starting line. That can't be easy for the psyche to get yourself yourself amped up for a 15-minute main and then have to just sit and keep the adrenaline up or be prepared to turn it back up when you get the message that it's time to compete. And they didn't even know if they were going to get that message. There was a good chance they were going to have to go and finish this thing in the morning. So let's just focus on the heat race for him and expect the main to be better next week, unless the weather gives us more unpredictable craziness. When it gets to the 450 heats, all the good guys did good. Eli wasn't hurt, like we said. 450s last week, you had Chase just close this thing out for all 20 minutes. Justin Barsha on his tail, or at least in second, and Kenny Roxon just behind. And Eli has a mediocre ride. Every time he has a mediocre ride, he puts in an excellent one after that. And all these guys did good in the heat as well as Cooper Webb. But for Kenny in particular, he ends up getting third place in this main event. And it's nice to see him getting on the podium back-to-back weeks and having the speed consistently every time the gate drops. He's figured his health out. He's figured the bike out. And we got to take a look at some of this horizontal motion he gets in one of these rhythm sections, trying to get past Cooper Webb. He is going through these sections and they're notched out a little bit. The conditions aren't horrible, but lateral movement already isn't easy. He comes into the rhythm section pretty much on Webb's line, makes a last second adjustment in the air to fool Cooper Webb. Might have fooled himself. I don't know if he knew he was turning that thing left before he got the hips moving and the bike started coming with him. But he does it. It's ballsy, and he ends up shutting the door on this dude. And I don't think, even if we have seen Kenny win this season, we've seen that kind of panache, especially in a heat race. He finally figured it out. This dude wants it, and he's not going to be deterred. At this point, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to see him take another third place next week, or perhaps to podium out for the majority of all of the three remaining races of the 23 season. Now it's time, I guess we go ahead and jump into the 250 main. Said we were going to get around to it early, and I think we cut a little time off the intro. And we've talked about the mud race thing already. We talked it to death, but it's got to be said that when it comes to the mud race, there's two things that everyone feels comfortable saying about it. One is that the gritty guys are going to show up. These guys are going to excel, these rain or shine dudes. It's not just for the finesse guys. It's not for the guys that can throw down heaters on a perfectly groomed track. It's for guys that can bring it in situations where you're not meant to bring the shit. And the other thing that could be said is that they're absolutely unpredictable. With a mud race, you never know what's going to happen. And it's not surprising that Max Anthony ends up getting a win in this season. He's been racing absolutely fantastic with a little bit of luck and some slow and misfortune on his competitor's behalf, Hunter specifically. You knew he could bring it in. But if you told me that the one race or the first race he was going to win was going to be in the East-West Showdown, as packed with talent as it is, I would have said you were absolutely out of your mind. And if you told me that he was going to lead from the gate to the checkered, I might have had trouble believing it. But sure enough, we'll take a look at the whole shot he gets, and he absolutely sends this thing here, right? Everybody else is getting onto the brakes because they're fearful of the conditions. They don't know how bad the traction's going to be. They know there's probably not going to be any around this sweeping 180. The Brit doesn't care. He sends it anyways, manages to hold on to it, turns down while everybody else is still getting to the apex of the turn, and he just brings it home smooth and comfortable despite the conditions. Didn't really seem to have any bumbles at all. And as has been said on the broadcast, you got to wonder if it's because of his MXGP experience. He said in his post-race conference, he's always wanted to compete in a mudder in America in Supercross. And if you watch any of this MXGP stuff, the tracks are gnarly, not gnarly like, Red Bud and Larocco's Leap with just gigantic jaw-dropping stuff like that. But just in terms of the conditions themselves, they go to places all over the world, and not all of these tracks are taken care of. They let it break down, and they really don't even give a shit. They take pride in that. They expect people to be falling and picking themselves up. They got all sorts of just ridiculous sad tracks. And given that it is Europe, it's pretty much raining 370, 380 days out of the fucking year. And so he's experienced a lot more days like this than the other guys here. And so, viewed through that scope, I think it makes perfect sense that this is the race this guy ended up coming out on top on, even with the stiff competition. And if you look at the 450s and you look how well Kenny did, of course he's been doing good anyways. But there is another guy who competed in Europe having success, an extraordinary amount of success in these gnarly, muddy conditions. But as much as we want to pat Max Anthony on the back because he's such a good chap, we got to talk about the fact that he was almost tracked down by Jet Lawrence in the last lap. Jet Lawrence got into second in this thing with a good amount of time to go, and just lays on the gas, especially late. And on the last lap, he has to ditch the goggles, right? He's rolling into a rhythm section, and he just has to toss them completely. And that's pretty much where the gap extended, and he wasn't going to close that in one lap on this track. But I wish he hadn't had to toss the goggles, man, because he was close enough. I mean, probably 3 seconds, but close enough that he might have got this thing done. And if anybody could do it, it is Jet. We looked at how he put in that fastest lap of the day late. No reason to think he couldn't put in the fastest lap of the mains with these conditions here if he'd been able to see. So a bummer there, and another challenge that was taken away from us by the weather gods, quite frankly. But that being said, the fact that Jet Lawrence was slowed down by having to dump his goggles ends up giving us the biggest story of the night, in my opinion, or at least the most interesting moment, because it allows RJ Hampshire to catch up and make that failed pass attempt in the last turn. And that was one of the most entertaining moments in Supercross I've seen in a really long time. I mean, this guy wasn't even close. He was barely in the same stadium. And we just know who he is. We know he has the compulsion to send it whenever the opportunity arises. And the one guy that's ahead of him in points, you think he's going to be too kind to risk taking him down in such an extraordinary event as we got in East Rutherford? Absolutely not. This guy thinks it's not over till it's over. Even when it's over, he can't accept it. And both the balls and the sort of the naivety to think he could pull this off were absolutely amazing. The question I want answered is, would he have been able to pull that move off even on a track with perfect conditions? He was so far back, I'm not really sure. And then the fact that he hydroplanes instantly and can't get on the brakes at all makes it look so much worse. But I gotta say, I think the thing that works in his favor is that Hayden Deegan made the same exact pass, or had the same exact failed pass attempt in the same spot on Hunter Lawrence just a few minutes ago, before that happened with RJ's incident. And I think we got to take a look at that too, because it's almost like a glitch in the Matrix. When you saw RJ go down like that, it was a copy paste of what the 238 did. just moments before. And obviously RJ didn't have knowledge of that to know that you couldn't try that. But Deegan, while an aggressive racer clearly, is pretty conservative when it comes to taking risks that are going to hurt himself. When he bodied Jordan Smith, he was never at any risk of going down. This guy's strong on the bike. He'll just lean into you. He's buff as hell for anybody, much less someone that age. And, but he's also well reasoned, and he's not just going to take down the points leader out of nowhere because that's his aggressive style. He's also a very smart rider. And the fact that he thought he could make that pass there, or at least that he could send it in and close the gap and rev the engine and let Hunter know he was on his tail, if he's willing to try it where he is in his career, then I think it makes what RJ did look a little bit more reasonable, and I think it leads you to have to take into account that they weren't anticipating the traction to be zero there. They thought it might be 5%, and that was not the case at all. But if more than one rider misread it, maybe an honest mistake, more or less. And even if you're a Jet fan, you don't need to get all bent out of shape about it, because Jet recovers, rides over RJ literally to get to the finish. And not only does Jet end up taking the same position he would in second, but Max Voland has to go high around this berm to avoid hitting RJ and Jet, all entangled as they are. And it allows Hunter, who had caught up to Voland late, to make a pass up the inside and end up getting onto the podium. If his brother doesn't go down, Voland brings that home. He's getting on the box finally, and boy, did he need it more than Hunter. So that's kind of a shame to see. More bad luck for him. But before we move on from discussing this whole thing, let's just go ahead and take one more look at RJ Hampshire after the bike was completely buried. Guy never gets it out. I've never seen someone so caked in mud my entire life. It looks like one of those Army Ranger commercials where they try to persuade you to join by convincing you of how fucking horrible it is and how crazy you have to be to do it. And he's got a smile of pain, but he's got one nonetheless as he beckons to someone to come help dig this thing out. And I think this clip right here is pretty much bound to go down in the annals of Supercross history. And I say that despite the fact, or perhaps because of the fact, that it worked out for him horribly. It pretty much ruins the 250 West Championship. I mean, this guy's 39 points down now. I believe there's no way he's closing that gap with a couple races left. Ruins it for the fans, and really ruins for him what was an excellent season. Well, not ruins it, but certainly puts a damper on it. But I think all these tragedies just elevate the moment. I think they encapsulate who RJ is, and I think he encapsulates what a racer is. These days everything's becoming pretty much about race management, only going as fast as you have to. Guys like Jet and his brother Hunter are absolutely excellent at that. But at the heart of a racer is a guy that wants to win every race, no matter what the cost. It's not that he just wants to win the championship. He doesn't want to get beat for a lap. If he is the fastest guy on a bike, it is because he is the fastest guy on a bike all the time. And I don't think anybody takes that philosophy to heart more than RJ. And I think we can look back on this clip anytime we need some inspiration to remember what a racer is. Now, to just kind of wrap up the 250s here, I think it's got to be said when we go to the East that this thing is pretty well in Hunter's corner. He's 45 points up on Hayden Deegan now with 2 races left to go. And it's pretty hard to see how he doesn't go out and close this thing up next weekend in Nashville. Only has to come out of there 27 points up. So if he stays healthy, he's going to have one to add to the Lawrence family collection. But despite that success, I think it's got to be pointed out. We talked about the Hayden Deegan crash on the pass attempt on Hunter Lawrence. Hunter got chased down in this race, ridiculous conditions or not. He started in fifth, pretty much ran around there the whole night until he got that lucky little turn at the end, the little 2-for-1 with the number 24. And Deegan gets a bad start and ends up catching Hunter Lawrence with a lot of time to go. If he'd been more patient, there's no question that the 238 gets around HRC Honda's Hunter Lawrence. Deegan's the first guy to do this all year. It's not just that this is the first time Deegan's done it. Anytime Hunter hasn't finished up top, it's because he's been climbing through the pack. He's never gone backwards, at least to my recollection. And Deegan manages to do it in a main event, no less. And I don't know what Hunter's plans are in terms of how much longer he's going to ride around in the lower class. But if these guys get to go at it next year and Deegan starts the season off with the experience that he developed so quickly in the first few weeks of this series, then I think we're going to see these guys going at it every race. Maybe that's a bold prediction. Maybe it's not. But I mean, the guy's already second in the championship, and he's only been at this for like 7 weeks. So very excited to see what happens with those two next year. Although I'm not excited at all that either 250 series pretty much has no level of suspense or uncertainty left in it anymore. Now, getting into the 450s, I mean, I got to ask right away, did you shed a tear when Chase Sexton got taken down in the first lap? I know you might be a manly man. I know you might be someone that's not too eager to share their feelings, but I wanted to cry when that happened. I mean, this guy just can't catch a break. You know, it's like that expression, I can do bad all by myself. It's not that Sexton goes down, it's that he's been taking himself down so much. Seems like he finally has it figured out. Maybe the kinks are all smoothed out and ironed. He's only 17 points down coming into this thing, okay, and looking to build consistency after Seattle. I said, this guy's toast, you know, his goose is cooked, or whatever ridiculous expression comes to mind. And that's pretty much just it for the number 23. And, you know, with 3 races left, 17 points is slim against Eli and Coop, but definitely a possibility. And I just would have liked to see what he could do here. He still ends up getting 4th with a throttle full of mud, but just dashed in the first lap there. Sure, sometimes he's not always the best in the gnarliest conditions, but he had the start, and the start was everything here. And he's got the talent that you can't count him out anywhere. And it leads you to the question, and I'm sure everybody has opinions on it, but was the pass dirty? And of course, dirty or clean is a simplification because it's so subjective. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on the intent. These things happen at a speed where we can't really break them down fairly in hindsight. When it comes to whether it was deliberate, no, I don't think it was intentional. In a mud race especially, Justin Barcia knows how important it is to get to the front. If you're in first, you're the only guy that's guaranteed not to lose the ability to see, at least until you get into lappers. Being trapped behind someone, even if you've got the speed, is a nightmare because of the vision, because of the caked up goggles. Tear-offs can only help so much, and you saw these guys pulling them off at every point of the track, not just in the air, which tells you something right there. And so you could see why Barcia wanted the start. And he does end up lapping to 5th, right? He gets up to Cooper Webb. Everybody's a lap down on the track except for the top 4 guys. The only guy he didn't catch was Chase Sexton. And when you look at the pass specifically, he cut this thing so short and he was just head down. He was going. Chase Sexton wasn't the only guy that went wide in this berm. There were a bunch of people he could have collided with. And he didn't try to go high and push anybody out. It was not about taking anybody off the track. It was just that he saw room and he was going to put his bike there first. And that's just the type of ballsy move that a racer has to make if he wants to win. We've seen him do different things. We've seen him take guys extremely high in turns, go out of his way to crash people. And I don't think that this was that. I think a lot of people are in agreement with that and with the fact that with these conditions, getting up front quick was even more important than normal. And I think the fact that the guy didn't waste the opportunity at least makes it a little bit better. The dude hasn't got a win since Houston of 21. And so at least he made something of Chase Sexton's misery, and if Sexton hadn't been as close as he is in the points, I don't think we'd be talking about it. If he'd taken out, someone running in 8th place in the points, I don't know who that is. If he'd taken out Jason Anderson, we wouldn't really be crying over spilt milk. Of course, in that instance, we'd be excited for a different reason because we know of their rivalry. So maybe that wasn't the best example. And something that's interesting to look at here, and we're going to go ahead and pull up some video footage of this, is that just like with Hayden Deegan and doing a mirror image crash of the one that RJ Hampshire did, when it comes to Justin Barcia's pass that he made on Sexton, he makes the same exact pass on Kenny Roczen later, and Kenny Roczen manages to stay up despite being in almost the same exact position. I think he saw it coming a lot sooner than Chase did. There weren't a bunch of riders still wreaking havoc everywhere because it wasn't the first lap, and so he was very aware. There's one guy behind me. It's the number 51. I know how he is, and he had to roll off the track to avoid having contact made with him. And he stays up, though, unlike Sexton. And I think that shows furthermore why Chase Sexton crashed with the mud. You cannot really slow down when you're on a bull berm that steep. If you let off the throttle entirely or hit the brakes on some dry soil, even at an angle, you can maintain traction. That's not going to happen with where Sexton was on that berm. If he doesn't maintain forward momentum, he's sliding right off that thing. So he had to keep rolling, even when he sees Barcia coming, and just not able to avoid it like Roczen. As far as Kenny Roczen is concerned, we already praised his spot here, and I think he did a great job to recover from this, showed great presence in this, and he almost loses it one more time. And he also manages to save this. Not save it by keeping it off the ground, but he manages to save it by keeping the clutch in, even as he's falling off the bike. And we know he's got the Kickstarter. We know these conditions. If he doesn't do that, bike's dead, and he's not restarting it again. There's just no fucking way with all that mud caked everywhere. And it's a save. I think it's a win. And he seemed pretty pleased with the third, even though for a while it seemed like he could get second. And the last guy we got to talk about is the guy that made the pass on him when Kenny puts it down in the whoops right here. And that's Eli Tomac. Despite being hurt in the morning, it was clear that this guy really wanted it. He gets comfy late. There's about 3 minutes left is when he gets Kenny. And for some time before that, he had just been building speed. He settled in, and then he turned it on. And I think he really wanted to make a statement in a way that is not always a behavior you'd expect from the number 23. He is not typically the kind of guy to push for points at all. We know he loves to salvage in these types of situations. He knows that Chase is out. He knows Cooper's behind him, and he's not going to catch up because there's such a big gap. I think often he just mails this in, and you'd think that especially with an injury. And yet that was not Eli Tomac's prerogative at all. He was clearly inspired by the injury. He was clearly frustrated. I mean, I think, nothing to feel bad about letting go of the handlebars, but when someone's a champ and as talented as he is, all the championships he has, that's not the type of mistake you typically make. And I think he was frustrated with himself. And I think he wanted to come out and prove to himself more than anyone else. And with all the adversity the night presented, that he could rise up to a challenge. And he didn't come out to New Jersey just to nurse the championship out. He is a champion. He's going to win this one. He's certain in his opinion, in mine as well. And he was not going to waste any time increasing that gap on the number 2, who comes out of this thing 11 points down. And the way Cooper Webb just can't find the pace, you got to think he's in trouble now. It's been a few weeks, and I thought he was going to re-find the speed that he had when he got the red plate, when he chased it down. Hasn't been able to find it so far. And with 3 rounds left to go and Eli riding good and apparently still healthy, it's going to be hard for him to figure out how to gain these points back in the few rounds that are remaining. Either way, I'm sure he's going to try next week in Nashville, where we go back to the 250 East. And we'll get together then and we'll talk about everything that happened. Let's just close this one out by taking a few more shots of Justin Barcia like a pig in the mud, celebrating his victory. We mentioned it, how long it's been since this guy had one, and he deserved it, right? We've seen him building the pace for weeks. We've seen the determination. We've seen the tenacity. We've even seen him get so fast that he no longer feels like he needs to be dirty. He's shaking hands with his opponents now instead of telling them to go fuck themselves in his New York accent, with that coming out. And all the pieces are together. I've been saying all year, like many have, that he's getting one before the year is out. I thought he was probably going to come in and do great here, maybe get it tonight with the track within the conditions it had in the morning or even in the heats. I did not realize this guy was as good at mudders as he is, but he was just completely comfortable, kind of being uncomfortable on the bike, hanging off it, letting it get loose. He wasn't tight. He just trusted that he was going to be able to keep it upright by reacting. And you could see that other guys significantly behind him on the track, even getting lapped, were just a little bit tighter. They didn't trust it. The back end was slipping around, and they were gripping the bike and the handlebars really tight because of it. So a great job for the number 51. And this being the case now, I don't think we can be surprised if he comes out in Nashville next week and finds a way to get another one. This guy kind of builds on momentum, and this is more than he's had for a while. And I think the dude looks pretty much as good as he's ever looked at any time in his career. So great job for him, the number 51. Eager to see what he does next week. And after they throw it down on Saturday, I'll see you all here on the Live for Supercross podcast. We'll break down everything that happens there, all the action, all the crashes, all the video highlights you want. Go ahead and follow us on Instagram if you want at Live for Supercross. Leave us some comments with some predictions for who you think's going to pull it out next week. And remember in the meantime that if you live for Supercross, then you need some love from the Live for Supercross podcast.